Hi there, I am Cornelia Harris Banks, and I am a former councilwoman in the city of Galveston. Today, I am participating with Araminta, who is the person who does tours in the city of Galveston. Before we begin with Araminta, I just want to let you know that we are part of the Galveston Island African American Treasures. We are looking forward to all the activities that are going to be presented in order that you have a wonderful time. Now let's hear from Araminta. Araminta?
Hi, I am Dr. Araminta Sorrell. I am the owner and founder of Juneteenth and Beyond guided tours. So Galveston is a phenomenal place for Black history. There's so many sites and stories that have been left out of traditional history books and traditional tours in Galveston. This is the first city-sanctioned African American tour in the city. This is the first one. So it's very exciting to be a part of the Juneteenth story and the stories for African Americans.
And that's why we're excited to have you a part of Galveston. I know that you have moved to Galveston, and you know we have a lot of people don't realize that we're an island, and so we have island talk. And one of the things that I can say to you is that you're IBC, which means Islander by choice.
Yes.
And so we are very happy to have you here with this tourist program. And so can you continue telling me some of the questions that you are asked sometimes when you have folk coming?
Yes. So as I provide tours for citizens of Texas, Louisiana, people are coming from all over to take part in Galveston history and to go to the beach because that's a big draw. Galveston has a lot to offer. But one of the things that people ask me the most is, did Lincoln really free the slaves? Should Lincoln be given credit for freeing African Americans in the U.S.? So I've done some research, and I try to have an answer that is historical and factual, not based on myths or popular urban legends,
Yes,
for instance.
yes.
So from what I can tell, I think he is due the credit, because if not him, then his administration. We know that the Emancipation Proclamation was passed and went into effect on January 1st, 1863. It was introduced in September of 1862. So there was already quite a bit of buzz that fall as people were looking forward to New Year's Day when it would go into effect. So there were places where African Americans were that where they knew that it was coming. And perhaps you're familiar with Watch Night?
Yes.
Church Watch Night?
Yes.
So that was set up in anticipation of emancipation. So New Year's Eve, folks all over the South who had been liberated by the Union Army already, places like Port Royal, South Carolina, they were anticipating emancipation the next day. So that is where that tradition comes from. Watch night service is because the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect on New Year's Day. So what did the Emancipation Proclamation actually do? It actually freed people who weren't under Lincoln's jurisdictions. So it freed people in rebel territory, not in the states that were still a part of the Union. Those people had to be freed later. But so who really freed the slaves? It was the men with the guns. That's how people were free. Wherever the Union Army went, then people were freed. But it was under that proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation. So that was 1863. But prior to that, in 1862, the Lincoln administration had ordered the freedom for enslaved people in the District of Columbia. And they, in fact, paid reparations to slaveholders in the District of Columbia, $300 per person. They were paid to release those people from bondage. And so where did they go? Lincoln, he didn't really think equality was going to work for African Americans and for Anglos to live together, because he had seen a lot of violence already. He kind of knew what would happen. But he thought that colonization would have been a good idea for African Americans. And so there had already been a movement of colonization to Liberia. So African Americans went there who were freed from slavery and who were already freed people. They went there and set up a colony that became independent in 1847.
That brings to mind that it validates the watch night, and in January, in our local newspaper, the Galveston Daily News, has the story about the first celebration at the Colored Church on Broadway, which happens to be Reedy Chapel, African American, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And so that really brings forward that these historical things happen.
Yes, and that they affected people in their
Yes.
everyday lives. So people who were in rebel territory and were freed by Union soldiers, they were emancipated as the Union soldiers marched through the South. But what about the states that weren't in the Confederacy? There were 4 states that weren't in the Confederacy. These were border states. Maryland was one, my home state. Well, I'm from D.C., so Maryland is very close. So those people were freed later, but it was the 13th Amendment that actually ended slavery. And the 13th Amendment began the ratification of it, getting it through both houses of Congress. That started under Lincoln's administration. So he has, to his credit, he has the 13th Amendment, which did abolish slavery, except in the cases of a crime, which, there was always this dodge for holding black people back, and that was the dodge with the 13th Amendment. So unfortunately, that ushered in convict leasing and arresting black people for trumped up charges and for insignificant things in order to keep a steady flow of forced labor in the South. However, the 13th Amendment did get its start under Lincoln's administration, as did the Emancipation Proclamation.
Wow. That is just wonderful history. The other question that I wanted to ask, or to bring about, in that amendment, wasn't it there a situation where the slaves were freed but didn't know what to do and couldn't go anywhere?
Yeah, so, that reminds me of General Order Number 3 from General Gordon Granger, who came to Galveston. He arrived June 17th, and June 19th he delivered his executive orders. He had 5 of them. And he came with United States troops, many of them United States colored troops. So what a glorious time here in Galveston for African Americans to see black soldiers with weapons and authority in their town after so many generations of hardship. But the proclamation, or General Order Number 3, it was to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. So now we're looking at 1865, June 19th, 1865, whereas the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect January 1st, 1863. So we're 2.5 years past the time when Lincoln tried to free slaves, people who had been enslaved in rebel territory. But as part of General Order Number 3, it said that, African Americans are forever free, according to the Emancipation Proclamation. However, like I said, there's always a dodge. There's
Yes,
always something
yes.
that just kind of keeps us, held back. The order stipulated that people stay where they are, that you work for wages, that you enter into contracts with former slaveholders, and that you act quietly, and that there be no idleness and don't appear on military bases, that you stay where you are and enter into contract agreements. So it was a very difficult time for African Americans because reading and writing had been outlawed. So, okay, enter into a contract, but I don't know how to read yet, and I don't know how to write yet. I can make a mark, but it was very easy for people to be cheated, and for them to be continue to be mistreated by the Confederacies. Even though the war was over, they still had that same mentality that
yes.
you're not equal. If you're not Anglo like me, then I have the right to rule over you.
Right. And then once they were considered free, they couldn't even use the parks for the celebration because they were not allowed in the parks, especially on the island of Galveston. But understanding that in the areas of Brazoria and other areas surrounding, that there were major picnics that people could use for celebration, or the way they celebrated Juneteenth.
Yeah, so African Americans began celebrating emancipation in 1866. Well, certainly on June 19th, they were celebrating big time. And as you were saying, one of the places they went to give thanks was Reedy Chapel on 20th and Broadway, a beautiful building that's still there, lovely chapel. Got started in 1848 and is still holding services as normal today. But I did find it interesting that even the 4th of July for 1866 and 1865, it wasn't celebrated by Anglos in Galveston because they were occupied by
Yes.
the Union forces. So it was the African Americans who were celebrating the 4th of July
Yes.
and Juneteenth. And so there was much that they were thankful for. Because even though there was still segregation and black codes, you didn't have families being separated and people being sold and African Americans being used as collateral for mortgages and to cover debts. That's how so many people got separated, because once the slaveholder passed away, they start to try to get their affairs to look at their estates. They would see all of this debt. And to cover their debt, they had taken out mortgages on their property. Well, what was their property? Their property, it was the African Americans. So that's why Harriet Tubman ran away, because the slaveholder that owned her family had died, and she feared that she was going to be sold. So a lot of people got separated from their family members because of that, because of the debt.
I understand as well, while you're talking about Reedy Chapel, that they do a reenactment of that particular time, the first celebration of Juneteenth. And do you have people who are interested and call you and you let them know that it goes on, it's going to happen this year? It's been going on now for about 40 years.
Yes, there's quite a bit of interest in Galveston Island and in the Juneteenth celebrations. There's a lot going on during the month of June, but especially that weekend. And the reenactment at Reedy Chapel, Ashton Villa, parades, festivals, my tours. It's going to be a fabulous time. Galveston is a wonderful tourist town. Last year in 2022, 8 million people came to Galveston for recreation. So it's a fabulous place to come for a vacation, but specifically during the month of June and for African American history.
Because there is so much African American history, a lot of firsts. Many of the churches, denominations are all first.
Yes, and Galveston was a place where people could get jobs
Yes.
and education. After the Civil War ended, a lot of black people moved to Galveston from the plantations in the surrounding counties because there were jobs here. It was a port city, and so there were people coming in and out. There were lots of different languages being spoken. There was opportunity for people to make money and have decent lives and to get their children educated. We have the first high school, the first African American high school in the state was established in 1885 in Galveston, which was a wonderful, amazing thing because you didn't have high school in other areas. In many parts of the country, it just went from up to the 8th grade. And if you went to high school, somebody had to pay for it. But in Galveston, it was free. And people would send their children to Galveston for high school like we send our kids away to college, because there was an opportunity for growth. And after emancipation occurred, everybody wanted education. There was a hunger, a thirst for it. So they would send their kids to Galveston, and they would be cared for. The
Yes.
community care, just like HBCUs. That's their claim to fame, is that we're going to provide some tenderness and kindness for your child when your child comes to our school. They're not just going to get a great education, they're going to be looked after. And that's what happened in Galveston. There were boarding houses that were set up all around in the black communities, and people stayed, their kids went there and they were looked after. They had curfews, they were made sure that they were respectful, letters going home, you're going to eat right, you're going to study, you're going to be a credit to your race, because that was extremely important in those years right after slavery ended.
That's just wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm smiling because I attended that school and graduated from Central.
So
That was-
you know the
Yes.
feeling and the thought
Yes.
that went, and we have Galveston's most famous son, Jack Johnson,
Yes.
the heavyweight boxer of the world.
Yes.
But he said that he grew up in Galveston. His parents, had been slaves, and when he was growing up, he didn't feel any racism at all. He hung out with a group of white boys, and he ate at their house. He slept at their house. They were back, just like kids, everywhere, who loved having friends. Their friends are so important. He had black friends, he had white friends, and he grew up not feeling at all inferior or the teeth of racism. But that's because the community in Galveston was so kind and nurturing and progressive.
And that's the truth. That is the truth. I'm sure there are some other questions that you're asked on the tour.
So another question that people ask me, because many Texans are familiar with Juneteenth, right? They grew up celebrating Juneteenth, and so they really kind of know that story. So they ask me, well, what happened after Juneteenth? What happened to the African Americans who were newly freed, and what was going on with them? So they struggled. Definitely, they struggled because they didn't get resources. They didn't have money, they didn't have education. So it was tough for them. But people did their best. And one of the things, there were several things that they did with a passion. First thing was they tried to find their relatives that had gotten separated from them during slavery. That was a crucial thing that they really tried. They've tried to find Mama. They tried to find Uncle Joe, Big Sis. They, because their hearts were broken from being separated from their family members. And there's a wonderful story of Hawkins Wilson, who was born in Virginia and was a part of the separation because of debt of a slaveholder. So he was separated from his family at the age of 6 and sold down south. And he ended up in Galveston after emancipation. So he never forgot his family members, and he remembered all of them and who owned them and who they were married to, because it had burned in his brain that someday I'm going to find my family. And, it's a lovely story that, his family knew he was going to be separated, and his sister made a bag of biscuits for him, did what she could to try to let him know how much he was loved and cared for, and that someday they would meet again. So he was a member of Reedy Chapel. And so he sent a letter to the Freedmen's Bureau in Virginia to help me find my sisters, help me find my family. So he talked about, gave clues to how they could be found. And he said to let them know you can find me at the Negro Church on Broadway. And this was, 1867, early, right after emancipation. But the letters went to the wrong county, so he didn't find his family. But interestingly enough, recently, his descendants in the Houston area, they signed on to Ancestry to try to find their relatives, because grandparents had passed on, and they were like, wait a minute, we got to find our people. So they signed on with Ancestry, and they got a genealogist to help them. And the genealogist knew of the records of the Freedmen's Bureau, and she was able to connect with Hawkins, the information about Hawkins and these family members. And then she was able to connect this family tree with existing family in Virginia.
Araminta, let me tell you, you are just exciting to listen to. I am so happy that you came to Galveston, have your business, your tourism business, and that you have done such a fine job dealing with the history of Galveston and the people of Galveston.
Oh, it's fascinating.
And so, we want everybody to definitely, you got the number that you can tell us the number and the
Yes.
name of your business and
Yes.
how it is operated.
Oh, okay. So the name of the business is Juneteenth and Beyond, because I like telling stories of Juneteenth, but we can go
Good
beyond
storytelling.
Juneteenth. Yeah, we
Yes.
can go into how integration came to Galveston. We can talk about the wonderful people, African Americans who did phenomenal things, who were from Galveston. So it's not just about Juneteenth; it's Juneteenth and Beyond. And I have a website, JuneteenthAndBeyond.com. The telephone number you can reach me on is 409-509-6868. I have regular scheduled tours, so on the website you can sign up for a tour. But if you had something special in mind, if you have a large group, or you're trying to figure out how you could spend as much time as you wanted here, I have private tours, so I can customize the tour to fit you and your needs. So sometimes I step onto busloads of people, and I provide the tour that way. I have a van where seats up to 7 people, including myself, so we tour the town that way. Or I can give a presentation at a designated location on the history of African Americans around the Juneteenth story that encompasses the Middle Passage all the way up. How did Black people come to Galveston? How did we even get here? What's that story? That's phenomenal. But I did want to tell you that one of the other things that Black people did after emancipation was that they legalized their marriages. That was extremely important, because they didn't have marriage certificates during slavery. They had to get permission from the slaveholder, and then it was, okay, you can marry so-and-so, and, jump the broom using the local religious person, a minister, who might have been a relative or somebody, nearby, but it wasn't legal. So that you didn't have the protection of the government for your marriage. It wasn't sanctioned legally, and they wanted that because that helped them to feel like citizens, not slaves, but citizens. So there was a huge passion, huge crush to get marriage licenses and to display them at the Nia Cultural Center, there is a copy of Jack Johnson's parents' marriage certificate. They got married in 1867, and that was
Yeah.
that was it. That was a big crush for that, looking for their family members, getting legal marriages, and getting an education. That was crucial to everybody. Everybody had a thirst, a passion. And so you would have, the one-room classrooms where you'd have little kids, 6 and 7-year-olds, with people who were 60 years old, because they were all learning how to read for the first time in their lives. But those are the things that people did once emancipation came.
Those of you who are listening to this conversation, you see that we have found an excellent treasure, a treasure that's beyond anything that we need to know. Araminta, what got you to start being a person who was interested in tourism?
Oh, well, I am a native of Washington, D.C., and I have a bachelor's in history and government from Bowie State University, which is an HBCU. But history it was a family hobby. So I grew up in D.C. that's filled with museums, and many of them are free to the public. The Smithsonian's, all of those, and they were when I was coming up, and they still are free. So we spent a lot of time going to museums as a kid. I'm the sixth child in my family, so it was, we had a lot of kids and not a lot of money. But my family, we loved to go to museums and learn history. Everybody in my family is a history buff. My father was a history buff. We're all history buffs. I'm the only one with an actual degree in it. And, of course, since I'm the baby, nobody listens to anything I have to say, right? They all know more than me. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. But I am also a certified social studies teacher. I'm certified in the state of Texas to teach secondary social studies in regular education and special education. So I have dual certification in social studies and special education. And so history has always been just a love of mine. And as I worked for Johns Hopkins University once I got my PhD, which I received from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Another historical place, right? Wonderful history in Charlottesville. So I traveled around the country helping schools that were, high poverty, low performing. So my area was behavior. So helping schools to become more positive, implementing positive behavior supports. So I worked in Miami, Baton Rouge, LA, Detroit, Baltimore, Peoria, many schools. And everywhere I have traveled, I've always looked for the Black tour. I want to know about my people. What were we doing? Because you don't get that on standard tours. You really have to hunt for it.
Yes.
So when I started coming to Galveston in 2006, that was the first thing I noticed. Hey, Black tours here. What's up with that? So I just decided then, I was going to retire and start a Black History tour in Galveston.
Great. We are just so lucky that you chose us.
Yeah, well, Galveston has two of my happy places. Anywhere there's Black history, I'm going to be happy. And anywhere there's water and a beach, I'm going to be happy.
Great.
So it has everything I could ask for in a retirement. So I retired in 2021. And I started this business. This is really my first year. It took me about 2 years to get through the red tape and to be certified by the city. I had to get a chauffeur's license. I had to appear before the city council, before the mayor. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of red tape. But I persevered, and I had a lot of support.
I was going to say you persevered, and that's what happened.
African Americans in Galveston have done some amazing things. They are an amazing group, and they opened up their arms to me. They're like, yeah, that's a good idea. How can I help you? And so I have gotten tremendous support, like from yourself, with this wonderful opportunity here. Sam Collins III, he acted as a mentor and helping me to understand the content of history and how, to talk about it here in Galveston. Like, what are the things that Galveston is most remembered that are most important to African American history. So he has helped me with that. Councilwoman Sharon Lewis has helped me with getting my application through the city at that level. Alex Thomas of the Park Board has helped me get a grant from the city of Galveston to get my business started. I could go on and on, but it's just a joy to work with people here in Galveston.
I think we're happy people.
Yeah,
And
Galveston
we
has
really
that
want
effect.
to help people, each other, work together.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Sam Collins always says is that a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yes.
So we're all in this together, trying to get our story told
Yes.
and told accurately.
Yes.
So that's my interest in tours here in Galveston.
Well, we like that. We like that. We do. And again, you know, I as I said, there are so many things that you bring forth and make me remember. I too am an educator as well and have taught history, but of course I was in California at the time. But history is just fantastic.
Yes.
It just is. It makes you whole and understanding what's happening around you, to you, and for you.
Yeah, and it's a crucial part of American culture.
Yes.
And, you know, people say, oh, history's not important. Well, look at it. It's always in the news because there's an assault on history textbooks
Yes.
and on history AP classes, African American history classes. And so if it's not important, why is there so much attention being paid to banning books and trying to erase our contributions? It's not going to work, by the way.
No.
It never has. But it's always something that we have to fight against.
Yes.
So getting the opportunity to tell our stories and to lift up our people out of the little paragraphs in the history book, if they're in there at all, it's such a joy, and it's so exciting, and it's so important, not just to African Americans, but to all Americans, because
Yes.
this is American history. You know, this is the history of this country from before it was even a country.
Exactly.
African Americans have always played a crucial role in America.
How they were brought even to our area.
Yes.
Not just through New York.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, Texas was a part of Mexico, right? It was Mexico. Texas was Mexico.
Was Mexico.
It was
yes.
Mexico, and at some point the Mexicans they were owned by Spanish, right? By the Spanish. Well, they kicked the Spanish out, and they were happy to do that. But before that happened, Moses Austin had set up an agreement with the Spaniards in Mexico that he wanted to bring people Anglos into Mexico so that they could populate the area. That the Spanish were having a difficult time keeping the Native Americans out of Texas, and they needed some help. So they turned to the Anglos of the U.S. to, hey, you know, why don't you all come and help us settle this area and deal with the Native Americans? And so Moses Austin, you know, he was like, yeah, that sounds good. So he set up an arrangement, but he passed away before it went into effect. But his son, Stephen F. Austin, took up the reins. And so the agreement initially was with the Spanish, but then the Mexicans rose up, kicked the Spanish out, and now it was Mexico and not Spanish, not owned by Spain any longer. Well, there was one thing the Mexicans did not want in their land, and that was slavery. It's like, you know, Anglos, you guys are welcome to come, but you can't bring slaves. We don't want slavery. We've outlawed slavery, 1829. We don't, it's not here, no more. And the Anglos were like, but we can't do anything without slavery. You know, we're going to be poor. Our kids are going to be poor. We're not going to be rich, because they wanted to establish a cotton kingdom, just like in Mississippi and Alabama and, you know, other parts of the Carolinas of the South. That's what they wanted for Texas. They wanted to be cotton kingpins. And in order for them to do that, according to them, they had to have people in bondage. And so that from day one, when they first started trickling in, slavery was a problem.
You see what I mean? When you come and you decide that you want to go on a tour, please check with Miss Araminta. Araminta, can you walk me through one of your tours? What will the people see?
Oh, yes. So we start the tour at Old Central at 26th and M. And Old Central is the first high school in the state of Texas for African Americans. So we start there and we talk a little bit about education in Texas after emancipation. And we also talk about Jack Johnson, because the Jack Johnson Park is adjacent to Old Central. And there's a beautiful statue of him there. So we talk about him and his contributions and what a wonderful person he turned out to be in business, and not just a great boxer, but he had inventions and businesses, and we talk about what happened with him. But he is Galveston's most famous son. Then we head down to the harbor, the 21st Street Pier, where there is a marker to the slave trade there. It's to the Middle Passage, and it's there to show. It's a map that shows where Africans came from and how they went to South America and the Caribbean and on into the lower 48 states, and how that worked out. And we talk about slave ships that came. Where you see cruise ships now, those would have been slave ships and other kinds of import-export ships, but Galveston Harbor was very busy. And people are really amazed that the ships came through the bay and not the Gulf. But the deep water is on the bay side. So we talk about those things. And folks have a lot of questions about the slave trade, So we talk about all the countries that were involved in the slave trade, including the Pope. It was a global industry. And then we walk over to the mural on 22nd and Strand. And the mural... it's a phenomenal mural that's on the side of the building that was the Osterman building, which was General Gordon Granger's. That's where his headquarters was, right there at 22nd and Strand. So the mural depicts African-American history from the Middle Passage all the way through present day. And it's a beautiful design, colorful. You gotta see it. Audience, you got to come and see it.
I understand it's active too. You can.
Yes, it has built-in technology. So you download the Uncover Everything app and you scan the mural with your phone, and videos will pop up that explain the pictures. And you can download those videos, so you don't have to stand there and hold up your phone. You just download and you can take a look. And there's just exciting information about the United States Colored Troops, for instance, and the amazing things that they did. And so we take a look at that. There's a picture there of Harriet Tubman, and she represents the Underground Railroad, which actually went through Mexico here in Texas. We're far away from Canada, but like I told you earlier, right? Mexico freed the slaves in 1829. So that if you could get to Mexico from here, you were good. And a lot of people did. So we talk about those things. And then we go into the Neocultural Center that has beautiful Black art from local artists who often, you might see a local artist there. But so we tour that, and there's generally memory keepers there. Sam Collins might be there to tell us, to drop some pearls of wisdom on us. And there are other memory keepers. Sharon Barron, she's works there.
Yes.
So
Sue
Johnson, who's the owner. Yes, and Sue has been the owner, founder of the Neocultural Center for over 30 years. And she is another one of my staunch supporters. Sue has been very instrumental in helping me to understand the politics in Galveston and how to avoid problems. So she's one of my go-to supporters. So thank you for bringing her up. And then from there, we go to Ashton Villa. And Ashton Villa has a statue of Al Edwards, who was instrumental in getting Juneteenth made into a state holiday in 1979. I told you black people have done some amazing things here in Galveston. Yes, they have. They've been working very hard for a long, long time. Like 30 years for Sue, 1979, Al Edwards, to get equality and respect and dignity for our people. So we look at the statue of Al Edwards, and we talk about how there is breakfast every June 19th that he started at Ashton Villa, and he would be the guest speaker, and he did this for a very, very long time. And now that he has passed away, his son is now in charge of the breakfast, and they have the reenactment as you talked about earlier. So it's quite a lively place. It was built in 1859 by slave labor, so that's also important to know about. And it's a beautiful building. And then there's an exhibit there that's put on by the Galveston Historical Foundation and Still We Rise about Juneteenth and the history of African Americans in Galveston. So we talk about that. Then we go around to the back, and in the parking lot in the back, there's a wonderful statue, blank slate monument, that's going to be there, I think, until the end, till July 6th.
Yes.
But it has it is a way of reimagining monuments in our cities, in our public spaces. So this monument is a tribute to the struggles of African Americans, and it's filled with symbolism and history and art, and it's done by a Nigerian.
I was going to say,
Ghanaian. I'm sorry,
Yes.
a very popular Ghanaian artist, and it travels around. And so it's called Blank Slate because at the very top of it, you can, as an observer using the internet, write a message. And so the message could be celebrate Juneteenth, Happy Emancipation Day. But your story, your protests can be a part of the monument for a short amount of time. And then from there, we go to Reedy Chapel and take a look at their historical marker and talk about Hawkins Wilson and his letters and how important that church has been to the black community since 1848.
Yeah, Norris Wright Cooney.
And Norris Wright Cooney, we talk about him. And he was the perfect person to come along during Reconstruction, because he had everything that was needed to help our people. He had education. He had roots in the white community. His father was Anglo. His mother was an African. But there were 6 of them, and everybody got educated. So this father loved his children.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the message that you get. And so he was able to be one of our chief politicians.
He was our first city council member.
Yes, and much more. And he had a business, right?
Yeah.
He
was over the Republican Party at that time in the state of Texas. Yes.
Yes, so he was.
I'm one of those people who follow him.
Yes.
After being a city council person here.
Oh, I see. Yeah, how wonderful is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we talk about him and his contributions to education, because he was instrumental in getting the high school established, and he had a business.
The war.
And he hired black people to work as longshoremen and stevedores, and he paid them the same rates that everybody else got. He did amazing things to promote African Americans during a time when they really needed help, because they were released without resources, released from bondage without resources, and kind of at the mercy of the former slaveholders. The Confederate mentality was still there. So those are the places that we go to, and there are other places we could go to, and I could continue talking, like the McGuire Dent Recreation Center, named after Jesse McGuire, who was one of the founding members of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. There is huge, beautiful recreation center. It takes up the whole block. It's got any and everything you could want in a recreation center, but that's dedicated to her because that was land that her father owned. And even though, he had been a slave and had gotten released with nothing, he started what we would call a taxi cab business, where he would cart people around the city, and he started making money. And there were he had white friends who helped him understand contracts and business, and his business grew and grew. He started buying houses and land and, providing opportunities for other people. And so that recreation center is built on land owned by her father. And so it's dedicated to her. Just an amazing family, right?
Yes.
That's the spirit of Galveston African Americans, a can-do spirit, truly taking advantage of what America has to offer and being successful in many, many ways when no one thought they would be.
Please check with Miss Araminta because she's a great storyteller and she is proven that she's extremely interested in history, not only during Juneteenth, but as she says, beyond. So please make sure that you call Miss Araminta. You're going to give us that information again.
Yes. The website is JuneteenthAndBeyond.com, no spaces. And the phone number is 409-509-6868.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.